In a game where every rapper is trying to sell you the same personality for the next 10 years, Kendrick Lamar has quietly done something so unhinged, so surgical, and so terrifyingly deliberate that the entire industry still cannot process what they are looking at. Because when you actually sit down and trace the timeline, when you strip the paint off the mythology and look at what has really been happening from Compton to the world stage, you will realize that Kendrick Lamar has never been a rapper. He has been a shapeshifter. He has been a series of ghosts. He has been a man walking through a hallway of mirrors, dropping one identity, picking up another, and using each version of himself as a shield against the pressure that would have broken any other artist in the last 20 years. And what everybody thought were characters, what everybody thought were album gimmicks, were actually survival mechanisms. They were escape hatches. They were psychological armor that Kendrick built in real time, so he could keep breathing while the whole world tried to crown him, cancel him, worship him, and destroy him all at once. What you are about to see is the most terrifying career blueprint hip-hop has ever produced, and once you understand the pattern, you will never listen to a single Kendrick bar the same way again. Picture this for a second. A kid from a neighborhood that eats its dreamers alive, standing in front of a microphone, and instead of doing what every other rapper does, build one brand and ride it until the wheels fall off, Kendrick decides he is going to become a rotating door of personas. Each one born from a specific storm in his life. Each one dying the moment he outgrows it. And each one whispering something to the audience that the man himself could not say out loud. This is not a career. This is a controlled demolition of the modern celebrity playbook. And if you have not been paying attention to the versions of the artists standing at the center of it all, you have missed the greatest identity war ever fought inside hip-hop. Not a war between rappers. A war between selves. A silent, decade-long civil war fought inside one man's skull, on wax, in front of the entire planet, and almost nobody caught it in real time. Let us rewind to the very beginning. The exact person you were not expecting to become the most important artist of his generation was a teenager called m.A.A.d. This was the version of Kendrick Lamar that lived roughly from 2003 to about 2009, and if you go back and listen to those early tapes, the mixtapes floating around Compton, the underground ciphers, the freestyles that used to circulate on burned CDs, you can hear something almost frightening in the voice. Not fear. Focus. M.A.A.d was not trying to save the world. M.A.A.d was not trying to be a prophet. M.A.A.d was a technician obsessed with becoming the sharpest sword in the room. He wanted to out-rap Lil Wayne. He wanted the presence of Jay-Z. He wanted the neighborhood respect of a Compton legend. And the beautiful thing about that early era is that he had absolutely no weight on his shoulders. No expectation. No responsibility to speak for anybody. It was just craft. Just bars. Just a hungry kid trying to prove he belonged in the same sentence as the greats. There is a freedom in that stage of an artist's life that he would never get back. Because once you become a spokesperson, once you become an icon, once you become a mirror that a whole culture looks into, you cannot go back to just being a rapper who wanted to see how many syllables he could squeeze into a bar. M.A.A.d was the man before the pressure. M.A.A.d was the man before the mask factory started building costumes for him to wear. And when the dust clears on his whole career, you will understand that everything that came after was one long, obsessive attempt to remember what it felt like to be that kid again. Then the shift happened. And this is where the shape-shifting truly began. Around the time Section 80 dropped, and then Good Kid, m.A.A.d hit the world, he retired the M.A.A.d name and stepped into himself. He stopped hiding behind an alias and started speaking as Kendrick Lamar. But make no mistake, this was still a persona. This was still a mask. It was just a mask with his real name printed on it. This version of Kendrick was the survivor. This was the young man who suddenly realized that fame was not going to save his friends. This was the artist who looked around at his old block and started counting who was still alive, who was locked up, and who was fading. And that counting turned into music. Cold, grieving, prayerful, brilliant music. Because here is the part nobody talks about. The Survivor era is soaked in something that most rappers refuse to touch: survivor's guilt. Kendrick Lamar was watching his childhood friends drown in the same water he was learning to swim out of. He was getting record deals and radio play while the people he grew up with were getting court dates and funerals. And instead of pretending everything was fine, he made an entire album that felt like a diary you were not supposed to read. Good Kid, m.A.A.d is not a rap album. It is a confession. It is a young man asking why he was allowed to escape a maze that ate everyone he loved. And that is the sound of a mask being carved out of real pain. That is the sound of somebody who understood, before anybody put it on a magazine cover, that escaping Compton was going to cost him something he could not name yet. But watch what happens next. Because a lot of rappers would have settled into the survivor role and milked it for the next decade. He refused. He did the opposite. He shed the mask again. And what he became next was, frankly, terrifying. Around 2015-2016, when To Pimp a Butterfly hit the world and cracked it in half, Kendrick stepped into a persona so heavy that most artists would have collapsed under the weight of it. He became the prophet. This was Kendrick Lamar as the voice of a generation. This was Kendrick Lamar carrying the entire cultural conversation on his back. He had already made his money. He already had the respect of every rapper alive and every rapper dead. He could have coasted. He could have made hits. But something inside him refused. Something inside said that if he had been given the microphone, he was going to use it to say something that mattered, even if the saying of it destroyed him from the inside. And that decision, more than any bar, more than any beat, is what separated Kendrick from every peer in his class. He traveled. He went to South Africa. He walked through communities that reframed his entire understanding of what a black man in America was actually navigating. He came back changed. And when he stepped into the booth, he came in as a preacher, an activist, a documentarian, a rebel, and a spokesman all at once. To Pimp a Butterfly is not an album. It is a sermon disguised as jazz. Every song is a wrestling match with institutional racism, with the sinkhole of fame, with the psychological damage of being asked to represent a whole people while being just a person yourself. You could hear a man trying to translate the entire history of the African diaspora into 79 minutes of music and almost breaking his own soul in the process of doing it. And here is what almost broke him. Being a prophet is not a role you can turn off at the end of the workday. Being a prophet means the world stops seeing you as a person and starts seeing you as a symbol. Kendrick started to lose himself inside the prophet mask. He was trying to be the perfect leader, the perfect artist, the perfect voice, the perfect representative, and the perfect black man in America all at the same time. You cannot do that. Nobody can do that. And you could hear the tension bleeding into the music like a wound that would not clot. The prophet was killing the man underneath. And most fans, drunk on the brilliance of the music, did not notice that their favorite artist was quietly bleeding out in front of them. That is why, when you strip the paint off the mythology, the next persona makes perfect sense. Because after carrying that weight, he had to prove, to himself more than to anybody, that he was still allowed to be dangerous. He was still allowed to be competitive. He was still allowed to be a rapper first and a prophet second. And that is where Kung Fu Kenny walked into the story. That is where the war got weird. 2017, the album called Damn. And out of the smoke of the prophet era stepped a completely different creature. This one was armored. This one was aggressive. This one was borrowing energy from old martial arts films, wrapping himself in the imagery of a warrior, and looking at the throne of hip-hop like a man who was tired of pretending he did not want to sit on it. Kung Fu Kenny was a reminder to the world that beneath the sermons and the political weight, he was still the deadliest technician in the game. He was still K-Dot with better production and a bigger stage. He was still the kid who wanted to out-rap everybody in the room. He had just spent a few years hiding it under the robes of the prophet, and now the robes were coming off. But Kung Fu Kenny was more than just an ego trip. This mask had a civil war inside of it. Because the artist was wrestling with two forces that most performers never let the audience see. On one side, humility. The awareness that he came from nothing, that his family was watching, that his community was counting on him. On the other side, pride. The knowledge that he was the most important rapper alive, that he had earned every crown, and that the world was going to have to deal with him whether they liked it or not. Kung Fu Kenny was the sound of those two forces punching each other in real time. That is why the album Damn feels so schizophrenic. That is why the songs pivot from prayer to violence in the same breath. Because he was not writing songs. He was refereeing a fight inside his own chest and letting the audience listen through the wall. And then, in the middle of all of it, the impossible happened. Kendrick Lamar disappeared. This is one of the most fascinating disappearing acts in modern celebrity culture, and nobody talks about it enough. For roughly 5 years, the biggest rapper on the planet went off the main stage. No albums. No press runs. No interviews. No visible social media presence. Not a whisper. Not a leak. Not a rumor that lasted more than a weekend. The world started to whisper. Was he done? Was he broken? Had the weight finally crushed him? Had the prophet burned out? Had Kung Fu Kenny put down the sword? And in the silence, The industry moved on the way industries always do. New rappers rose. Old rappers pivoted. The cycle kept spinning. But Kendrick was not gone. Kendrick was in the workshop. He was building the next mask. And when he finally showed up in 2022 with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, he unveiled the most dangerous version of himself yet, the broken man. For anyone still catching up on why this era shook the entire culture, understand what he actually did. Kendrick walked into the studio and, instead of stepping back into the prophet costume that everybody was expecting, he stripped himself naked in front of a global audience. He told his fans he was not their savior. He told them he had been sitting on a therapist's couch for years. He told them he had been unpacking trauma he had never even admitted to himself. He talked about failures in relationships. He talked about being an imperfect father. He talked about lust and rage and jealousy and generational wounds. He pointed the entire spotlight, the same spotlight he had been aiming at society for a decade, and he turned it directly on his own reflection. And then he made the audience sit in the light with him. This was the bravest move Kendrick had ever made. And most of the audience did not know what to do with it. Because for years, they had built a cathedral around him. They had put him on a pedestal so high that the man himself could not breathe on it. And when he came down, when he said out loud that the pedestal had been suffocating him, some people cheered and some people felt betrayed. The broken man asked a question that no rapper of his stature had asked before. If you cannot fix your own house, do you really have the right to demand the world fix itself? That question detonated across every timeline on the internet. It shattered the church that had been built around him and forced every fan to decide whether they loved the artist or the idol they had projected onto him. And the receipts are already sitting on the table. Because after the Broken Man era, Kendrick did not go back to being any of the versions the audience remembered. He did not put the prophet robes back on. He did not resurrect Kung Fu Kenny. He did not reboot m.A.A.d for nostalgia. Instead, he built the newest mask, the one that is arguably the most cinematic of all of them, the persona that people around him have started calling Oklahoma. The Ghost. The Shadow. The one that showed up on GNX and is still walking through his current chapter as we speak. And this one is not like the others. This one is designed to never be caught. This version of Kendrick Lamar is unlike anything hip-hop has ever seen from him. He does not do long interviews anymore. He does not appear on late-night couches to explain the deep meaning of every bar he wrote. He does not chase the news cycle. He does not respond to gossip. He does not perform vulnerability the way the Broken Man did. He just drops music, disappears back into the fog, and lets the culture chew on what he left behind. He is a ghost with a microphone. A phantom with a discography. He appears only when he decides the moment deserves him, and the second the moment is over, he is gone again. No victory lap. No explanation. No breadcrumbs. And this is where the Drake war comes in, because you cannot talk about the Ghost era without talking about the moment the Ghost picked up a sword. When Kendrick stepped into the ring against Drake, he was not being the prophet. He was not being the Broken Man. He was not being Kung Fu Kenny either. He was being something colder. Something more efficient. Something more surgical than anything the audience had seen from him before. He did not try to understand his opponent. He did not try to find common ground. He did not pause to reflect on the emotional dimensions of the beef. He walked in, executed the mission with a precision that shocked even veteran journalists, and walked back out into the shadows the moment the job was done. No press. No podcast tour. No trophy hoist. Just a body on the floor and a door closing behind him. That is not a rapper. That is not even a competitor. That is an operator. Somebody who has done the psychological work of shedding every version of himself that could have hesitated, second-guessed, or negotiated. The Ghost does not negotiate. The Ghost delivers. And when the smoke cleared and the entire internet was still trying to process what had just happened, Kendrick was already back in the workshop, working on the next thing, uninterested in the victory lap that other rappers would have milked for the next 3 years. That level of restraint is not human. That level of restraint is doctrine. And nobody in the room is arguing that this new version of Kendrick Lamar is the most fully realized he has ever been. Because when you strip the paint off it, the Ghost is what happens when every previous mask has done its job and been retired. m.A.A.d gave him the craft. The Survivor gave him the story. The Prophet gave him the mission. Kung Fu Kenny gave him the sword. The Broken Man gave him the honesty. And now, standing on top of all of those chapters, Kendrick has become the only artist in the game who has nothing left to prove to anybody, including himself. Every previous version handed him a piece of armor. The Ghost is wearing all of it at once and moving like it weighs nothing. He does not need to prove he is the best rapper because everybody already knows. He does not need to prove he is the voice of a generation because he already carried that weight and put it down when it stopped serving him. He does not need to prove his trauma because he already spilled it in front of the world. He does not need approval from critics. He does not need validation from the industry. He does not need to fight for his crown because the crown is bolted to his head with iron. He is standing in a place of peace and freedom that he has never had access to at any previous point in his career. And that piece of freedom is arguably more dangerous to the industry than any of the earlier masks. Because peace, in a system that runs on desperation, is a weapon almost nobody knows how to counter. Because a rapper who wants nothing is a rapper who cannot be bought. And this is the part that nobody is talking about loudly enough. Every previous era could be leveraged. m.A.A.d could be signed. The Survivor could be marketed. The Prophet could be televised. Kung Fu Kenny could be branded. Even The Broken Man could be turned into a tour, a documentary, a therapy campaign, or an award season narrative. But the Ghost cannot be packaged. The Ghost does not sit for interviews. The Ghost does not do the rounds. The Ghost does not put his face on the cover of the trend cycle. And that is why executives, publicists, media conglomerates, and content farms are quietly terrified. Because Kendrick has become uncontrollable. Not by scandal, not by chaos, but by discipline. And discipline, in this industry, is the one thing the machine has no algorithm for. If you pull the lens back and look at the arc of these masks in order, you start to see something almost supernatural in the design of it. Each persona arrived exactly when the previous one had done its job. Each mask was carved from a specific pressure that would have destroyed a lesser artist. Each version was surgically engineered to survive the exact battle in front of him, and then quietly retired the moment that battle was won. This is not luck. This is not accident. This is a level of self-awareness that has almost no precedent in the recorded history of hip-hop. You have to go back to jazz to find comparable evolution. You have to go back to Miles Davis reinventing his sound every 5 years to find somebody who treated identity with this much intention. Think about it. Most rappers pick one identity in their 20s and defend it until they are irrelevant. They cannot evolve because their brand is a cage. They cannot pivot because their fans will burn them for pivoting. They cannot admit growth because growth reads as weakness in a genre built on posturing. Kendrick detonated all of that. He treated identity itself like a tool, like a costume, like a chapter in a book that you close and never reread. And in doing so, he escaped every trap that has swallowed every other rapper of his stature. He didn't just avoid the traps. He mapped them, named them, and used them as raw material for the next persona. Because if you look at the biggest names that came up alongside him, you can see the difference in real time. Drake is still fighting to defend the same brand he built in 2011. He is dropping 3 albums a year, chasing the algorithm, feeding the machine, and posting every scrap of his life on the internet like his job depends on it. J. Cole retreated into his own lane and rarely disturbs the mainstream conversation. Kanye West detonated his own credibility again and again by refusing to modulate his masks. Nicki Minaj is locked in cycles of online warfare. Travis Scott is in a stadium loop, chasing the same spectacle year after year. And alone in his corner, one man keeps shedding skins like a snake that has decided the desert belongs to him. That contrast is not accidental. That contrast is the whole point. And here is where the Jay-Z comparison finally becomes unavoidable. Because for a long time, the standard for hip-hop longevity was Jay-Z, build an empire, sign deals, turn every verse into equity, become a mogul. And Jay-Z executed that vision better than any artist in the history of the genre. But Jay-Z had to give up something to build that empire. He had to become a corporate figure. He had to sit at boardroom tables. He had to attach his name to conglomerates and holding companies. He had to become the industry in order to survive the industry. And that trade was worth it for him. But it was still a trade. Kendrick Lamar looked at that model and made a different choice. He said, I want the empire without the leash. He said, I want the influence without the shackles. He said, I want to build my own house and refuse to let anybody rewrite the blueprint. And so instead of chasing conglomerate partnerships, Kendrick Lamar built pgLang with Dave Free from the ground up. He built a creative agency that answers to nobody. He built a discography that he owns emotionally and structurally. He built a stage presence, the Super Bowl performance, the sold-out tours, the visual short films that operates outside the traditional promotional cycle. He is Jay-Z's discipline and Kanye West's imagination without either of their entanglements. He is what happens when a hip-hop artist finally figures out how to be free. Not free-ish. Not free within a contract. Free. And that freedom is exactly why the next persona is going to shake the ground when it arrives. Because the pattern is clear. Every time he has stayed quiet for a while, he has come back as somebody nobody was expecting. m.A.A.d became the survivor. The survivor became the prophet. The prophet became Kung Fu Kenny. Kung Fu Kenny became the broken man. The broken man became the ghost. And the ghost is not the final form. The ghost is a bridge. The ghost is the version that clears the runway for whatever comes next. Nothing about this arc suggests the story is finished. Everything about it suggests we are still in the middle chapters of something historic. If you have been watching the small signals, you can already feel the next mask being carved somewhere in the background. His recent moves, the surgical rollouts, the visual language of GNX, the choice to keep his personal life almost entirely offline, the strategic silences between drops. All of it feels like a man preparing for a chapter that will not look like anything the audience has ever received from him before. Some people think he is heading into a full-blown filmmaker era. Some people think he is going to pivot into ownership of entire cultural institutions. Some people think he is quietly building the first truly independent hip-hop ecosystem in modern history, one that could eventually rival the majors themselves. Nobody knows for sure. And that is exactly the way he wants it. Because here is the truth that hip-hop has been slow to admit. Kendrick is not competing with rappers anymore. He is competing with the concept of celebrity itself. He is trying to prove that you can be the biggest artist in the world without becoming the property of the world. He is trying to prove that you can accumulate influence without becoming addicted to attention. He is trying to prove that you can build a legacy without selling every private moment of your life for content. And the personas, every single one of them, from m.A.A.d to the Ghost, have been rehearsals for the final act. The act where Kendrick Lamar walks off the stage entirely as a public figure and continues to shape the culture from a place the audience cannot see. Think about what that would look like. Think about how much power that would concentrate in one man's hands. Because when the dust clears on all of this, Kendrick's greatest performance was never a verse. It was never an album. It was never a Super Bowl stage. His greatest performance is the disappearing act itself. The ability to be the loudest voice in the room and then vanish. The ability to make a whole culture hold its breath waiting for the next word. The ability to weaponize silence in a genre that has forgotten silence exists. And every rapper who has tried to copy that move has failed because they mistake the disappearance for the trick. The disappearance is not the trick. The discipline underneath it is. And that is what makes this next chapter so cinematic. Because whatever Kendrick comes back as, it is going to redraw the whole terrain of what a rapper is allowed to be. It is going to force every artist in the industry to look at their own brand and ask if they have the courage to shed it. It is going to reset the standard for what longevity actually looks like in hip-hop. And it is going to remind everybody that the real geniuses of any art form are the ones who refuse to be captured by any one version of themselves. That refusal is the entire game. That refusal is the whole religion. If you actually zoom out and look at the arc, Kendrick has done what almost no artist in any genre has ever pulled off. He has turned identity into a discography. He has made the process of becoming himself into the actual product. Every album is not a collection of songs. Every album is a document of a mask being tried on, tested against the pressure of the moment, and either kept or burned. And when you listen to his catalog in order, you are not listening to a rapper. You are listening to a man in real time trying to figure out who he is under all the roles the world keeps trying to assign him. It is the most public, most musical, most exquisitely produced identity crisis in the history of Western pop culture. That is why the Kendrick Lamar story is so much bigger than hip-hop. Because in a culture where everybody is being told to pick a lane, define their brand, choose an aesthetic, and monetize the same personality forever, he keeps proving that the most valuable thing an artist can do is refuse to be pinned down. Refuse to be the same person twice. Refuse to let the market write the character description. Refuse to let the algorithm choose your face for you. That refusal, in the current era of infinite content and infinite surveillance, is almost a form of rebellion. And the moment you understand that, the entire discography starts to hit differently. m.A.A.d is not just early Kendrick. m.A.A.d is the origin ghost, the version that still lives inside every current bar, whispering the technique underneath the message. The survivor is not just a phase. The survivor is the moral compass that still points every project toward the truth. The prophet is not a costume he wore for one album cycle. The prophet is the voice that still murmurs inside the ghost, making sure the mission never gets diluted. Kung Fu Kenny is not a marketing gimmick. Kung Fu Kenny is the warrior that walks into every studio session, refusing to let comfort make him soft. And the broken man is not a moment of weakness. The broken man is the security guard standing at the door of his soul, refusing to let the fame back in. They're all still alive inside him. They're all still working. They're all still voting in every creative decision he makes. The ghost is just the manager coordinating the whole staff. And when you finally understand that architecture, you understand why nobody has ever been able to write him off. You cannot write off a committee. You cannot cancel a coalition. You cannot outmaneuver a man who has 5 distinct versions of himself running the operation in the back room. That is what makes Kendrick completely uncatchable in the modern cultural moment. Because you cannot pin down a man who is a committee of every version of himself he has ever survived. You cannot criticize one era without accidentally validating another. You cannot cancel him because the version you are trying to cancel already died years ago. You cannot corner him because he has a whole way of exits he built during every previous chapter. And you cannot predict his next move because the next move is not going to come from any of the versions the public has already met. It is going to come from the one currently being carved in the dark. And this is the part that hip-hop is going to have to reckon with sooner rather than later. He has raised the entry price for greatness. He has made every rapper coming up behind him look at his catalog and realize that the old goals, sell records, get platinum plaques, headline a festival, land a brand deal, are not enough anymore. Because he did all of that with one hand tied behind his back. The new goal is what Kendrick Lamar is doing now. The new goal is authorship at every level. Own the mask. Own the music. Own the distribution. Own the narrative. Own the silence. Own the return. Anything less than that is just noise now. Every young rapper in the studio right now is quietly measuring themselves against a bar that keeps getting raised in real time. And most of them are not going to make it. Because most of them cannot let a persona die. Most of them cannot shed a skin without panicking. Most of them cannot survive 5 years off the grid because their entire self-worth is calibrated to weekly attention. He can. He has. He will do it again. That is the difference between a rapper and an architect. And he has been an architect for a very long time. Everybody else is just now catching up, and by the time they figure out what he was doing, he will already have moved on to the version of himself that renders their imitation useless. So when you look at where he is standing right now, post-Drake, post-GNX, post-Super Bowl, post-everything, the temptation is to say that Kendrick has reached the top. That there is nothing left to climb. That the mask factory can finally close its doors. But that is exactly the moment when Kendrick tends to reinvent himself again. And if history is telling us anything, the next persona is not going to look like any version we have ever met. It might not even sound like him. It might be a version that does not rap for stretches at a time. It might be a version that builds instead of performs. It might be a version that vanishes for another 5 years and comes back as something none of us have vocabulary for yet. Cinema. Institution building. A hip-hop label with a manifesto attached. A silence so long people forget he was ever loud. Any of it is on the table. Whatever it is, one thing is undeniable. Kendrick has already proven that the way you win in modern hip-hop is not by defending your identity. It is by refusing to have just one. And he has built a career that is not a career. He has built a chain of ghosts, each one more precise than the last, each one delivered exactly when the moment demanded it, and each one dissolving the moment the mission was complete. That chain is the actual masterpiece. The albums are just the receipts. And that, more than any bar, more than any album, more than any battle, is the reason he is not just the most important rapper of his generation. He is the most important artist of his generation. Period. Because he did not just make music. He rewrote what it means to be a public person in the age of infinite content. He weaponized privacy. He weaponized evolution. He weaponized silence. And he did it while everybody around him was screaming. That contrast alone is going to be studied for the next 50 years, in music schools, in business schools, in film schools, and in whatever new schools the culture invents to try to make sense of what Kendrick Lamar pulled off. So the next time somebody tells you Kendrick Lamar has fallen off, or gone quiet, or lost the plot, remember what you just learned. Remember the pattern. Remember the masks. Remember the ghosts. Remember the workshop where the next version is being built right now, in the dark, in the silence, in the room the industry cannot access. Because the second the door opens again, everything is going to shift. The conversation is going to change. The culture is going to hold its breath. And whatever mask walks out, whatever ghost steps forward, whatever version of himself he decides to hand the microphone to next, One thing is certain. Nobody in the room is going to be ready. Not the critics. Not the executives. Not the peers. Not the fans who think they have already figured out where he is heading. Not even the people closest to him. Because that is the whole point of a shapeshifter. The reveal is always the second half of the surprise, and the first half is always that the surprise was coming at all. The ghost is still writing. The workshop is still humming. The next persona is still being carved. And when the reveal finally lands, do not expect an announcement. Do not expect a rollout. Do not expect a warning. Because that is not how ghosts move. That is not how architects operate. That is not how the man behind the masks has ever done anything. He shows up, redraws the map, and disappears again before anybody can figure out what just hit them. That is the pattern. That is the promise. That is the whole story of Kendrick Lamar in one sentence, a man who keeps proving that the greatest identity of all is the freedom to keep becoming somebody new. And the freedom to keep leaving behind everybody who thought they had already caught him. So tell me, which era hit you the hardest? Was it m.A.A.d before the wait arrived? Was it the survivor when the guilt bled into the bars? Was it the prophet when he tried to hold up the whole culture with one voice? Was it Kung Fu Kenny when the warrior finally picked up the sword? Was it the broken man when he took off the armor in front of everybody? Or is it the ghost, the one still moving through the shadows, the one still building the next mask? Drop it in the comments. Because whatever era shaped you the most is a mirror of what stage of your own life he was walking through with you. And that is the real magic of a shapeshifter. He becomes whatever you needed him to be at the exact moment you needed it. He becomes whatever the culture cannot afford to lose at the exact moment the culture forgets to protect it. And when the next mask arrives, we will meet him there too. Standing in the same room, holding the same breath, watching the same door, waiting for the same ghost to walk back through it, wearing a face none of us have seen yet, carrying a message none of us are ready for, and disappearing again before we finish reacting.